At the Sunridge Karate Dojo, the air buzzed with energy. It was a typical Saturday afternoon, and students of all ages filled the large training hall. The room smelled faintly of sweat and polished wood, while the sound of feet shuffling on mats echoed off the walls. In one corner, a group of younger kids practiced basic kicks under the watchful eye of an assistant instructor. On the other side, teenagers sparred lightly, their movements sharp but controlled. Emily Davis stood near the center of the dojo, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wasn't the tallest girl in the class, nor the strongest, but she had a quiet determination that set her apart. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and her white karate uniform was freshly pressed, a sign of how seriously she took these lessons. Today, however, Emily felt nervous. Something about the way Coach Harris had been acting made her uneasy. Coach Harris was a tall man with broad shoulders and a stern expression that rarely softened. His voice carried across the room like thunder, commanding attention wherever he went. He believed in discipline above all else and didn't hesitate to criticize anyone who failed to meet his high standards. While some students admired his dedication, others feared him. Emily fell somewhere in between. She respected his knowledge but couldn't help feeling intimidated by his sharp tongue. The session began as usual, with warm-up exercises followed by drills. But when it came time for students to share personal goals or stories related to martial arts, things took an unexpected turn. One by one, the students spoke up, sharing tales of inspiration, how their parents encouraged them, or how they dreamed of competing in tournaments someday. When it was Emily's turn, she hesitated. All eyes turned to her, waiting. Finally, she found the courage to speak. "My grandpa used to be a world champion," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. "He taught me a lot about karate before he passed away." Her words hung in the air for a moment, met with polite nods from a few classmates. For Emily, this was more than just a story. It was a piece of her identity, something she cherished deeply. But Coach Harris reacted differently. His eyebrows shot up and a smirk spread across his face. "A world champion?" he repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Really? What's his name then? I'm sure I would have heard of him if he was so great." The question caught Emily off guard. She stammered, trying to recall her grandfather's full name, but the pressure of the moment made her mind go blank. Harris stepped closer, his shadow looming over her. "You're making this up, aren't you?" he accused, his voice rising. "Trying to get attention? That's not what this dojo is about." Before Emily could respond, his hand shot out, connecting sharply with her cheek. The slap echoed through the room, startling everyone into silence. Tears sprang to Emily's eyes, but she bit her lip, refusing to let them fall. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. For a few seconds, no one moved. The older students exchanged uneasy glances while the younger ones looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Then someone whispered, "That wasn't right." Another muttered, "Why did he hit her?" But no one dared to speak up. The fear of Coach Harris's wrath kept them silent. Just as Harris barked for everyone to return to practice, the heavy wooden doors of the dojo creaked open. At first, nobody paid much attention. People often came and went during sessions. But when a figure stepped inside, the entire room seemed to freeze. Standing there was Chuck Norris, dressed in a simple black gi with a red belt tied neatly around his waist. His presence was magnetic, commanding immediate respect without saying a word. Chuck surveyed the scene calmly, taking in the tense atmosphere and the shocked expressions on the students' faces. His gaze lingered on Emily, whose cheek was still red from the slap. Slowly, he walked toward her, ignoring the protests of Coach Harris, who demanded to know why he was interrupting the session. Kneeling down to Emily's level, Chuck placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft yet firm. Emily nodded, though her lower lip trembled slightly. She couldn't believe what was happening. Chuck Norris, the legendary martial artist she'd idolized since childhood, was actually here speaking to her. For a brief moment, the pain and embarrassment faded, replaced by awe and disbelief. Meanwhile, Coach Harris grew increasingly agitated. "Who are you to barge in here and disrupt my class?" he snapped, crossing his arms defiantly. Chuck straightened up and turned to face him. There was no anger in his expression, only calm authority. "I'm just a visitor," he replied, evenly. "But I couldn't help noticing what happened here. Maybe we should talk." The tension in the room thickened as Harris struggled to maintain his composure. He glanced at the students, many of whom were now openly staring at Chuck with admiration. Realizing he was losing control of the situation, Harris gestured impatiently. "Fine. Whatever. Say what you need to say, but make it quick." Chuck ignored him and addressed the entire class instead. "Karate isn't about power or intimidation," he began, his voice steady and clear. "It's about respect. For yourself, for others, and for the art itself." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And if anyone tells you otherwise, they don't understand what true martial arts are about." As he spoke, Emily felt a spark of hope ignite within her. For the first time that day, she realized she wasn't alone. Even though she'd been humiliated and hurt, there was still justice in the world, and maybe, just maybe, things could change for the better. Chuck Norris stood tall in the center of the dojo, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the tension that filled the room. The students stared at him, their eyes wide with disbelief and admiration. Even Coach Harris, who had initially bristled at Chuck's arrival, seemed to shrink under the legendary martial artist's steady gaze. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the faint rustle of uniforms as nervous students shifted on their feet. Finally, Chuck broke the silence. "I've been hearing some things about this dojo," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Things that concern me." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He turned to Coach Harris, who was standing stiffly near the edge of the mat, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "You're the instructor here, right?" Harris nodded curtly, though his jaw tightened. "Yes, I am," he replied, trying to sound authoritative. "And this is my dojo. If you have something to say, say it quickly. We're in the middle of a session." Chuck didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, studying the faces of the students. Some looked curious, others fearful, and a few seemed inspired by his presence. Then his gaze returned to Harris. "Let's settle this like martial artists," Chuck suggested, his tone casual but deliberate. "Show me what you've got." The challenge caught Harris completely off guard. For a second, he blinked in confusion, unsure if he'd heard correctly. When he realized Chuck was serious, his face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "What? You think you can just waltz in here and—" "I'm not asking for a fight," Chuck interrupted smoothly. "Just a demonstration. Unless you're afraid to step onto the mat with me." The mention of fear struck a nerve. Harris straightened up, puffing out his chest in an attempt to appear confident. "Fine," he snapped. "If that's what you want, then let's do it. But don't expect me to go easy on you." A murmur rippled through the crowd of students. They exchanged excited glances, whispering among themselves. No one could believe what was happening. Here was Chuck Norris, offering to spar with their notoriously strict coach. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. As Harris stepped onto the mat, Emily watched from the sidelines, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what to expect. Part of her wanted Harris to lose badly, to be humiliated after everything he'd done. But another part worried about how far he might take things. After all, Harris didn't seem like the kind of person to back down easily. Chuck moved gracefully onto the mat, his movements fluid and unhurried. Unlike Harris, who wore a scowl and clenched his fists tightly, Chuck appeared relaxed, almost serene. He bowed politely to Harris, showing proper respect before a match. Harris hesitated for a fraction of a second before returning the gesture, though his bow was stiff and perfunctory. "Whenever you're ready," Chuck said calmly, spreading his arms slightly in a defensive stance. Harris didn't waste any time. With a loud shout, he lunged forward, aiming a powerful punch at Chuck's midsection. To the students' astonishment, Chuck sidestepped effortlessly, avoiding the blow without breaking a sweat. Harris stumbled past him, momentarily off balance but quickly recovered and spun around to deliver a roundhouse kick. Again, Chuck moved with precision, ducking beneath the attack and stepping closer to Harris. It was clear from the start that Harris relied on brute strength rather than technique. Each of his strikes was forceful but predictable, leaving openings that even a beginner might exploit. Chuck, on the other hand, demonstrated perfect control. He blocked and dodged every attack with ease, never once raising his voice or showing signs of strain. After several failed attempts to land a hit, Harris grew visibly frustrated. Sweat dripped down his temples, and his breathing became labored. "Stop dancing around," he barked, throwing a flurry of punches in quick succession. But Chuck remained composed, using subtle footwork to stay just out of reach. Then in one swift motion, Chuck countered. He grabbed Harris's wrist mid-punch, twisting it gently but firmly to redirect his momentum. Before Harris could react, Chuck swept his leg out from under him, sending the larger man crashing to the mat with a thud. The impact echoed through the room, leaving everyone stunned into silence. For a moment, Harris lay there, staring up at the ceiling, too shocked to move. When he finally sat up, his face burned red with humiliation. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. Chuck extended a hand to help him up, his expression neutral. "Good effort," he said simply. "But remember, karate isn't about overpowering your opponent. It's about understanding yourself and respecting others." Harris hesitated, clearly torn between pride and shame. Eventually, he accepted Chuck's hand and pulled himself to his feet. Though he tried to maintain his tough exterior, it was obvious that he'd been shaken to his core. Once Harris was back on his feet, Chuck turned to the rest of the class. "What you saw here today is important," he began, addressing the students directly. "Too many people think martial arts are about aggression or dominance. That's a mistake. True mastery comes from discipline, patience, and humility." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he gestured toward Emily, who still stood quietly near the edge of the mat. "This young lady mentioned earlier that her grandfather was a world champion. Do you know why that matters? Because it shows where she comes from and maybe where she's headed. Respect her story. Encourage her journey." Emily blushed at the unexpected praise, lowering her head shyly. But deep down, she felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time that day, she didn't feel small or insignificant. Instead, she felt seen and valued. Chuck continued speaking, his voice warm and encouraging. "Each of you has potential. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, and don't let fear hold you back. Whether you're practicing kicks or facing challenges in life, always strive to be better, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too." As he spoke, the mood in the dojo shifted. The earlier tension dissolved, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. Even Harris, who had retreated to the corner of the room, seemed to reflect on Chuck's words. Though he avoided making eye contact with anyone, his posture suggested a hint of remorse. When Chuck finished, the students erupted into applause. Some cheered loudly, while others simply clapped respectfully, overwhelmed by the lesson they'd just witnessed. Emily joined in, her hands trembling slightly as she clapped. She couldn't stop thinking about how different things felt now compared to just a few minutes ago. Before leaving, Chuck approached Emily one last time. Kneeling down to her level, he smiled warmly. "You've got a lot of strength inside you," he told her. "Don't forget that." Then, reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small photograph of himself and handed it to her. "Take this as a reminder. Keep working hard, and someday, you'll make your grandpa proud." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope. Clutching the photograph tightly, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. With that, Chuck Norris turned and walked toward the exit. As the doors swung shut behind him, the students erupted into conversation, buzzing with excitement about what had just happened. Emily stayed where she was, watching the spot where he'd disappeared. In that moment, she knew her life would never be the same again. The dojo felt different after Chuck Norris left. The air seemed lighter, the tension that had gripped the room earlier now replaced by a sense of possibility. Emily stood near the edge of the mat, still clutching the photograph Chuck had given her. Her fingers traced the edges of the picture as if to confirm it was real. She couldn't stop thinking about his words, how he'd told her she was strong and capable. For the first time in a long while, she believed it. Coach Harris lingered, in the corner, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He looked smaller somehow, his usual imposing presence diminished by what had just happened. The students avoided looking at him, their focus shifting instead to each other or the mats beneath their feet. No one knew what to say, or if they should say anything at all. The silence stretched on, heavy and awkward. Finally, Harris cleared his throat. "Back to practice," and he muttered, his voice lacking its usual sharpness. He gestured vaguely toward the center of the room, but no one moved immediately. The teenagers exchanged uncertain glances, while the younger kids shuffled nervously. It was clear that Harris's authority had been shaken, though no one dared to challenge him outright. Emily hesitated for a moment before stepping onto the mat. She wasn't sure why she did it. Maybe it was because Chuck had reminded her of her own strength, or maybe it was because she wanted to prove something to herself. Whatever the reason, she took a deep breath and began practicing a kata, moving slowly and deliberately through the familiar motions. At first, she felt self-conscious, aware of the eyes watching her, but as she continued, she lost herself in the rhythm of the movements, her body flowing smoothly from one position to the next. One by first, the other students joined her. They spread out across the mat, mimicking her actions or working on their own techniques. Even Harris eventually stepped forward to correct a few stances, though his corrections were quieter than usual. His tone lacked the harshness that had defined him before. Instead, he offered brief, practical advice, keeping his distance from the group. As the session went on, Emily noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere. Conversations between students grew more relaxed, laughter breaking through the earlier unease. A boy named Jake, who had always been too shy to speak up during class, approached Emily with a hesitant smile. "That was pretty cool what you did earlier," he said, nodding toward the spot where Chuck had stood. "I mean, standing up like that. Not everyone would have handled it so well." Emily blinked in surprise. She hadn't thought of herself as brave, not until that moment. "Thanks," she replied softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "It wasn't easy, but I guess I didn't want to let him win." Jake nodded, his admiration evident. "You didn't," he said firmly, "and neither did Chuck Norris." Their conversation was interrupted when Harris called everyone back to the center of the mat. To everyone's astonishment, he announced that they would spend the rest of the session focusing on partner drills designed to build trust and cooperation. "Karate isn't just about fighting," he admitted gruffly, avoiding eye contact with the students. "It's about teamwork too. Let's try something new." The announcement sparked a mix of reactions. Some students exchanged skeptical looks, while others eagerly paired off to begin the exercises. Emily found herself partnered with a girl named Lily, who had joined the dojo only a few weeks earlier. Though they had rarely spoken before, they quickly fell into sync, practicing blocks and counters with growing confidence. By the end of the drill, both girls were smiling, their earlier awkwardness forgotten. When the session finally ended, the students gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. As Emily walked toward the exit, she overheard snippets of conversation. "Did you see how calm Chuck was?" one boy asked excitedly. "He didn't even break a sweat." Another student chimed in. "I can't believe Coach Harris got thrown like that." Serves him right, though. The comments made Emily smile, but they also reminded her of how much had changed in such a short time. Outside the dojo, the late afternoon sunlight bathed the parking lot in golden hues. Emily paused for a moment, taking it all in. The photograph, in her hand, felt like a talisman, a reminder of the strength she carried within her. She thought about her grandfather, John Miller, and how proud he would have been to see her standing tall despite everything. Maybe someday she would tell his story to others, not as a boast but as a way to honor his legacy. Just then, a car pulled into the lot, drawing Emily's attention. The driver rolled down the window, revealing a man with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Hey there," he said, addressing Emily. "You're one of Coach Harris's students, right?" Emily nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir, I am." The man introduced himself as Ryan Carter, explaining that he had trained under Chuck Norris years ago. "I heard about what happened today," he continued, his tone gentle but serious. "Chuck mentioned this place might need some fresh leadership. If you're interested, I'd love to come by sometime and work with your class. What do you think?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. Fresh leadership sounded exactly like what the dojo needed and deserved. "I think that would be great," she replied honestly. "Everyone would really appreciate it." Ryan smiled, clearly pleased with her response. "Good to hear. Tell Coach Harris I'll be in touch soon." With that, he drove away, leaving Emily standing in the parking lot, her mind racing with possibilities. Later that evening, as Emily sat at her kitchen table, she carefully placed the photograph Chuck had given her inside a frame. Beside it, she set an old black and white photo of her grandfather, taken during one of his championship matches. The two images side by side seemed to tell a story, one of perseverance, courage, and the unbroken chain of inspiration that connected generations. Her parents noticed her thoughtful expression and asked what was on her mind. Emily hesitated, for a moment, then shared everything that had happened at the dojo. She talked about Coach Harris's anger, Chuck Norris's arrival, and the lesson she had learned. When she finished, her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "You handled yourself beautifully," she said proudly. "Your grandpa would be so proud of you." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat, but she managed a small smile. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered. "I think I needed to hear that." That night, as she lay in bed, Emily replayed the day's events in her mind. Despite the challenges she had faced, she realized something important. She was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. And with role models like her grandfather and Chuck Norris guiding her, whether in person or in spirit, she knew she could overcome anything life threw her way. For the first time in a long time, Emily drifted off to sleep with a sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready to face them head on. After all, true strength came from within, and she had plenty of it. The days that followed Chuck Norris's visit to the Sunridge Karate Dojo felt like the calm after a storm. Word of what had happened spread quickly, not just among the students, but also to their parents and families. By Monday morning, the dojo's phone was ringing non-stop with calls from concerned mothers and fathers wanting to know more about Coach Harris's behavior. Some demanded explanations, while others suggested changes in leadership. The pressure mounted, and it became clear that things couldn't go on as they had before. Coach Harris, for his part, seemed to retreat into himself. He showed up for classes, but his usual fiery energy was gone. Instead of barking orders or criticizing every mistake, he kept his instructions short and to the point. His tone softened, though it still carried hints of frustration. It was as if he were trying to prove that he could change, but whether he truly wanted to or was simply reacting to the scrutiny remained unclear. Emily noticed the shift immediately. On Tuesday evening, when she arrived for practice, Harris greeted her with an almost apologetic nod. "We're focusing on balance today," he announced to the class, avoiding direct eye contact. "Work with your partners and pay attention to your form." Though his words lacked warmth, they weren't harsh either. For the first time, Emily found herself wondering if maybe Harris wasn't all bad, just misguided. As the week went on, rumors began circulating about Ryan Carter, the man who had introduced himself to Emily in the parking lot. According to whispers among the students, Ryan had already spoken with Harris about taking over some of the teaching responsibilities. No one knew exactly when or if it would happen, but the idea sparked excitement. Many of the students had heard stories about Ryan's connection to Chuck Norris, and the thought of learning from someone with such a legendary background filled them with hope. Then, on Thursday afternoon, Ryan arrived at the dojo. He walked in quietly, dressed in a simple white gi with a black belt tied neatly around his waist. Unlike Chuck Norris, whose presence commanded immediate attention, Ryan blended into the room effortlessly. He greeted Harris with a respectful bow and introduced himself to the students with a friendly smile. "I'm here to help," he said simply. "Let's see what we can accomplish together." Ryan wasted no time getting to work. After observing a few drills, he stepped onto the mat and called everyone to gather around. "Today we're going to focus on something different," he began, his voice calm but engaging. "Instead of just practicing techniques, let's talk about why we train. What does karate mean to you?" The question caught the students off guard. Most of them had never thought about martial arts beyond punches, kicks, and belts. But Ryan encouraged them to share their thoughts, listening intently to each response. When it was Emily's turn, she spoke hesitantly at first, then gained confidence as she talked about how karate helped her feel stronger, not just physically, but emotionally too. Ryan nodded approvingly, his expression thoughtful. "That's it," he said. "Karate is about growth, about becoming the best version of yourself." Under Ryan's guidance, the atmosphere in the dojo transformed completely. Gone were the rigid drills and fear-based discipline that had defined Harris's methods. In their place came interactive lessons, group discussions, and exercises designed to build trust and camaraderie. Ryan emphasized teamwork, reminding the students that martial arts weren't about dominating others but about supporting one another. One exercise stood out in particular. Ryan paired the students randomly, assigning them roles as both attacker and defender. The goal wasn't to win, but to understand how their actions affected their partner. "Every move you make has consequences," he explained. "Your job is to communicate, not just with your body, but with your mind and heart." At first, some students struggled with the concept. Jake, the shy boy who had complimented Emily earlier, froze during his turn, unsure of what to do. But Ryan knelt beside him, offering gentle encouragement. "You don't have to be perfect," he said kindly. "Just try your best. That's all anyone can ask of you." By the end of the session, even the most hesitant students had opened up. They laughed together, shared advice, and celebrated small victories. For Emily, it felt like a weight had been lifted. She no longer dreaded coming to practice. Instead, she looked forward to it, eager to learn and grow alongside her peers. Meanwhile, Coach Harris watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. At times, he seemed conflicted, as if torn between old habits and new possibilities. Other times, he appeared genuinely interested in Ryan's approach, taking notes and occasionally asking questions. Whatever his feelings, it was clear that he was learning too, perhaps not just about karate, but about himself. As the weeks passed, Ryan's influence grew stronger. Parents praised the positive changes they saw in their children, noting improvements, not only in technique but also in attitude and confidence. Even Harris, who initially resisted the idea of sharing control, began to embrace the collaborative environment. He started attending workshops led by Ryan, seeking guidance on how to adapt his teaching style without losing sight of his core values. For Emily, these changes meant more than just a better training experience. They gave her a renewed sense of purpose. With Ryan's support, she decided to delve deeper into her grandfather's legacy, researching his achievements and gathering stories from family members. She discovered that her grandfather hadn't just been a world champion. He had also been a teacher, passing on his knowledge to countless students throughout his life. Inspired by this revelation, Emily resolved to follow in his footsteps, dreaming of one day becoming an instructor herself. One evening, after a particularly rewarding session, Ryan pulled Emily aside. "You've got real potential," he told her, echoing Chuck Norris's earlier words. "But remember, being a leader isn't just about skill, it's about character. How you treat others matters just as much as how well you perform." Emily nodded, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility. "I'll keep that in mind," she promised. "Thank you for everything." Ryan smiled warmly. "You're welcome. Keep pushing yourself, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. We're all here to support you." Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, she reflected on how far she'd come since the incident with Coach Harris. What had started as a moment of humiliation had turned into an opportunity for growth, not just for her, but for the entire dojo. She thought about Ryan's kindness, Harris's gradual transformation, and the friendships she had formed with her classmates. Most of all, she thought about her grandfather, whose memory continued to inspire her. Sleep came easily that night, bringing dreams of future tournaments, lessons shared, and lives touched. Emily knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she faced them with courage and determination. After all, she had learned that true strength came from within, and she had plenty of it. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through her window, Emily woke up feeling ready for whatever lay ahead. Today was a new day, full of possibilities, and she intended to make the most of it. Months had passed since Chuck Norris's unexpected visit to the Sunridge Karate Dojo, and the changes he inspired continued to ripple through every corner of the training hall. The once tense atmosphere was now filled with laughter, encouragement, and a shared sense of purpose. Coach Harris, though still present, had taken a step back from leading classes. He spent most of his time observing or assisting Ryan Carter, who officially became the head instructor after weeks of collaboration. It wasn't an easy transition for Harris, but he seemed to accept it, perhaps because he realized that the students were thriving under Ryan's guidance. Emily Davis stood near the center of the dojo one Saturday afternoon, tying her belt with practiced ease. She glanced around at her classmates, many of whom had grown closer over the past few months. Jake, the shy boy who used to sit quietly in the back, now led warm-up exercises with confidence. Lily, Emily's partner from earlier sessions, helped younger kids perfect their stances, her patience shining through. Even the youngest students, who had once been intimidated by Harris's strictness, now laughed freely as they practiced basic kicks. The transformation was remarkable, and Emily knew she was part of it. Ryan walked into the room carrying a clipboard, his usual calm demeanor radiating reassurance. "All right, everyone," he called out, clapping his hands lightly to get their attention. "Today's session is special. We're going to focus on something we haven't done much of yet, storytelling." The announcement sparked curiosity among the students. They gathered around him, eager to hear more. "Martial arts isn't just about techniques or discipline," Ryan explained. "It's also about the stories behind them, the people who shaped this art and the lessons they left behind. So today I want each of you to share a story that matters to you. It could be about someone who inspires you, a challenge you've overcome, or even a dream you're working toward." A murmur of excitement rippled through the group. Some students began whispering ideas to each other, while others looked thoughtful, considering what to say. When Ryan turned to Emily, she felt her stomach flutter. She had known this moment might come eventually, but she hadn't expected it so soon. Still, she nodded silently, accepting the challenge. One by one, the students stepped forward to share their stories. Jake talked about how karate had helped him overcome his fear of public speaking. A girl named Mia spoke about her older brother, who had taught her self-defense moves when she was little. Each story added depth to the group's bond, reminding everyone that they weren't alone in their struggles or aspirations. When it was Emily's turn, she took a deep breath and moved to the center of the mat. All eyes turned to her, and for a moment she felt the familiar weight of nerves. But then she remembered Chuck Norris's words. True strength comes from within. Drawing courage from that memory, she began to speak. "My grandfather was a world champion," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "He won tournaments and earned medals, but what made him truly great was how he treated people. He believed in kindness, respect, and helping others grow stronger, not just in karate but in life." She paused, glancing at the photograph of her grandfather that hung proudly on the dojo wall alongside Chuck's signed picture. "He taught me my first kata when I was 6 years old. Even though he's gone now, I feel like he's still here with me every time I train. His legacy reminds me why I love karate and why I want to teach it someday." The room fell silent as Emily finished speaking. Then, slowly, applause broke out. Her classmates cheered, their admiration evident. Ryan smiled warmly, giving her a nod of approval. "That was beautiful, Emily," he said. "Thank you for sharing your story with us." After the storytelling session ended, Ryan announced another surprise. Since we've been focusing so much on growth and teamwork, I thought it would be fitting to hold a small tournament next month, not for trophies or rankings, but to celebrate how far we've come together. The idea was met with enthusiastic cheers, and Emily felt a spark of excitement ignite within her. A tournament meant preparation, dedication, and the chance to showcase everything she'd learned. In the weeks leading up to the event, the dojo buzzed with energy. Students practiced tirelessly, refining their techniques and supporting one another. Emily trained harder than ever, determined to honor her grandfather's memory. She spent hours perfecting her katas, sparring with partners and visualizing success. At night, she studied videos of matches, analyzing strategies and learning from competitors' mistakes. Yet, amidst all the hard work, she never lost sight of what mattered most, the joy of improvement and the camaraderie she shared with her peers. On the day of the tournament, the dojo transformed into a vibrant arena. Mats covered the floor and banners adorned the walls, celebrating themes of perseverance and unity. Parents, siblings, and friends filled the seating area, cheering loudly as each match began. Emily's heart raced as she waited for her turn, her palms damp with anticipation. When her name was called, she stepped onto the mat, taking a moment to breathe deeply and center herself. Her opponent was a girl named Sarah, known for her speed and agility. As they bowed to each other, Emily reminded herself of Ryan's advice. Focus not on winning, but on giving her best effort. The match unfolded quickly, with both girls exchanging precise strikes and blocks. Though Sarah landed a few solid hits, Emily stayed calm, trusting her instincts. In the final moments, she executed a flawless spinning kick, earning points that secured her victory. As the referee raised her hand in triumph, Emily felt a surge of pride, not just for winning, but for staying true to her values. The crowd erupted into applause, and when she returned to her seat, her teammates greeted her with hugs and high fives. "You did amazing," Jake exclaimed, grinning widely. "Your grandpa would have been so proud." By the end of the day, every participant received recognition, not just for their performance, but for their spirit and determination. Ryan gathered everyone for a closing speech, his voice filled with emotion. "Today proves something important," he said. "Karate isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about becoming better versions of ourselves and lifting others up along the way. I'm proud of all of you." As the students dispersed, Emily lingered behind, soaking in the moment. The dojo felt alive, brimming with positivity and hope. She thought about how far she'd come since that fateful afternoon when Coach Harris had slapped her. What had started as a painful experience had blossomed into a journey of growth, resilience, and connection. Later that evening, as Emily sat at home flipping through her journal, she came across a note Chuck Norris had written for her. "Carry your grandfather's legacy with honor." Smiling softly, she added a new entry beneath it. "Today I honored him and myself." Though Chuck Norris never returned to the dojo, his impact remained etched in its foundation. And whenever Emily faced doubt or fear, she remembered his wisdom. True strength comes from within. With that belief guiding her, she knew she could face any challenge life threw her way.